Well, good morning, everybody. This morning, it's Bible school season. I've been working on a number of classes, and basically, I've just been working on a lot of stuff. So it was my turn to speak this week, obviously. And rather than just start something new in our Sunday school, we've been talking because we have this collegial study we're going to be doing, and we just finished something here. So it's like, well, we got like 5 Sundays. What are we going to do at that time? And I'd been studying Revelation quite a bit lately, so I was like, oh, well, we can talk about that some. So last couple of weeks, we've had a couple classes on that. And so rather than start something new, it seems like it's been beneficial. So I figured I'd share this with everybody, especially people, because in our Sunday school, people are teaching the kids and stuff. So I'm going to be talking about the demise of the dragon in Revelation 20. And for those of you guys here who have been in some of these classes, some of this is going to be stuff we've talked about. There's actually some that we haven't yet, but it's a lot more structured and organized than what we've been talking about in our class. But Revelation 20 is a heavily debated passage for sure. And basically, the question is, if you actually turn over to that, we're going to read just the first 10 verses. The question is this referring to a rebellion at the end of Christ's thousand-year reign, or is it referring to something else? So let's just read it for context. Revelation 20, verses 1 through 10. And I'll say there's a lot to the subject. Um, we definitely won't be able to cover everything today, but maybe we can talk about stuff later, or we can have a follow up to this later. But anyway, starting at verse 1, and I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold on the dragon, old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years, and cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled. And after that he must be loosed a little season. And I saw thrones, and they that sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus and for the word of God, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads or in their hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. But the rest of the dead lived not until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he that hath part in the first resurrection. On such the second death hath no power, but they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. And when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison, and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. And they went up on the breadth of the earth and compassed the camp of the saints about in the beloved city. And fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever. So, a lot of questions with this, and this is a subject I've learned because I've been studying this a couple of years now. You really can't just isolate one chapter and say, well, this means this, because it kind of ties in with so many other things in the book. So, uh, definitely not going to be able to talk about everything today. But when is this loosing period? Is this referring to something after Christ's reign? Because it says after the 1,000 years are expired, not towards the end of, but after they're expired, that Satan's loose, and that's something that I think a lot of people don't don't fully see. But anyways, um, all we're going to talk about today really is what point in Christ's reign is the dragon cast into the lake of fire? And I've read so many articles on this. Everything that's ever been published in the Advocate I've read, there's probably like 30 something articles. I've bought tons of books on it. And basically I've read stuff for the pro rebellion and that this is not a rebellion. And what I've seen, it's pretty consistent. And if you scan this PDF or this QR code, you can download the PDF. I really highly recommend you do that because there's a lot of slides, a lot of information on it. So this is the only place you see it too. So, but anyways, looking at we're weighing this subject of like, what's the pros and cons of each? What are the strengths and weaknesses of each argument? So if we're looking at that, this is referring to a rebellion at the end of Christ's reign. Strength is that's definitely the first impression we would get. Just if we've never read this before, we read it for the first time, that seems to be like it would make sense. The other thing is it talks about 1,000 year period, by I think 5 or 6 different times. It would we naturally our minds are like, oh, here's 1,000 years, there's 1,000 years. They must be referring to the same thing. So I can send it to you later, Mom, if you need to. Okay. Now, the problem with this, and there's a number of them, is this contradicts a number of prophecies about the kingdom age. When Christ returns, and there's so many verses on this, but people are going to turn their swords into plowshares. They're going to learn war no more. Micah 4 verses 3 through 5 talk about how there's going to be no end to peace. Isaiah 9, it talks about there's of the increase and the prosperity and the abundance of his government, there will be no end. So once this thing starts, it'll only grow, and the peace will only grow with it. So a rebellion after all that, after people don't war anymore, oh, well, now you're turning your plowshares back into swords. That's not in prophecy. Another big thing is this creates timeline issues with Christ giving the kingdom up to God. Because again, when I'm reading all these things in favor of the rebellion, it's always toward the end of his reign, or at the, like you got Christ reigning for 1,000 years, and the last 5 years of that or whatever is the rebellion. But if you note, it says after the 1,000 years are expired, that Satan's loosed out of his prison. So not even the rebellion takes place. It's after that 1,000 year period ends that this Satan entity is even released in the first place. And then it's got to go out and deceive all the nations in four corners of the earth. So there's a lot of time in that. And so basically, with this view, at the end of the 1,000 years, God is not all in all. Satan's released. So does Christ reign for 1,000 years and God comes down, or does he reign for 1,000 years? There's this period of deceit and all that, and then destroyed and God comes down. So there's issues with that. Another thing is the dragon's mentioned a couple times in Revelation, and according to a lot of the traditional views, it changes what it means in almost every single instance, which is not true of like the beast of the sea, the beast of the earth, and all these other beasts. It's very consistent all throughout. So it seems like something's not driving there. Big thing is Christ rules, and we read all these prophecies of his reign. Like people come to worship and learn. They say our fathers inherited lies. It's nothing but good things and peace. And for to say that at the end of all this, that almost every single mortal now comes against him and rebels against him, kind of gives indication that like, well, what was the point of this? I mean, how is this a successful reign if all of your subjects are now rebelling against you? So it just creates some issues with that. Another big problem is we saw the devil deceives all these nations and they compass the camp of the saints about. And one of the problems is this is at the end of Christ's reign after the entire planet has been subdued and ruled in peace for years. How are the saints, how are they able to surround the camp of the saints? Like, how can they surround these people that were covering the entire earth? So it creates problems with that. Every explanation I've read of this, and I've read up Eureka and up this Israel, all these, it's very poor explanations of how this mechanically can occur, and those explanations rely very heavily on assumptions. And the assumption is that after they've conquered everything, Christ and the saints basically just forfeit all of their kingdom, hold up in Jerusalem, and then let sin take over and then come against them, and then they're destroyed by fire. So again, heavily on assumptions here. Now, what about the fact that this is not a rebellion? This is another very consistent thing I've seen. Strength is basically all the weaknesses of the other argument. Well, this gives actual force to all the verses that say people are going to war no more, like ever. All these prophecies we talked about, they have their fulfillment. We have no problem with, Christ rules. He puts down all rule authority. At the end of the 1,000 years, all mortals are judged in some manner, and you have no mortals left. So that's when God comes down. It's a much more seamless transition of power from Christ to God. It shows obviously the success of Christ's reign of once he puts all enemies down, they stay down. And this also explains why are they able to surround the camp of the saints. If this is something that's referring to the beginning of Christ's reign before he's conquered the entire planet while his kingdom is still growing, it would make sense that they can surround him because they haven't conquered everything yet. We know Christ is going to start in Jerusalem and work outwardly. Now, weaknesses of this, identifying what is this 1,000 year binding and loosing period. And I think I've identified that. We're not going to talk about it today. Um, if this is referring to something that occurs towards the beginning of Christ's reign, why is it mentioned here in Revelation 20? And actually, now that I think about that, that's not really even an objection because the beast and the false prophet we know are cast in um, towards the beginning of his reign. Anyways, there's questions about that. And then why are there 2,000 year periods mentioned in a way that you could interpret it as being the same? So that's there's probably some more, but that's the gist of it. After having read all these things, marking up like, well, this makes sense, this doesn't. Those are the problems I see with this view. And again, um, I found something that makes a lot of sense. I just don't have time for it today. But so like I said, I've been studying this as objectively at pos as possible, and at times it would seem like the argument's going in favor of this, and then it would flip flop to that. But I've come across some things with it without question in my mind have just solved it completely, and they've solved it because it's scriptural proof. It's really exciting stuff, and again, don't have time to cover everything, but I guess we'll also preface this with the fact that this is not a matter of salvation. This is talking about kingdom age stuff. So if we're part of the kingdom age, this is stuff we hope to be a part of anyways. But that being said, we want truth. It's apparent with many that they're going to stick to a view no matter what. But we need to be able to say that we're seeking truth, whatever it is, especially if the scriptures point us in the direction of it, even though maybe we have different ideas on it of it at first. So, anyways, we're going to focus on verses 7 through 10. That's the loosing and specifically the demise of the dragon. So, is this a rebellion at the end of Christ's reign, or is it something towards the beginning? Well, the cool thing is, this has already happened in shadow form, like completely. It's already taken place, and we're going to look at Joshua because we know that Joshua is one of the greatest figures of Christ in the Old Testament. I mean, Jesus was named after this individual. They both had the same exact name. We know that Joshua was the one who brought them into the land where Moses couldn't, showing that only Christ will cause people to inherit the land. And if we look at a map, we see that they even enter the land at the same exact place. So there's a lot of things with this, and it's a very well understood fact that Joshua and the conquest of Joshua, really the whole book, is a figure of what Christ is going to do when he returns and how he's going to conquer. So, uh, this entire book is relevant to this subject, and we're looking at this shadow in the context of Joshua. Not tying in Judges or all these other books. It's just Joshua. What is Joshua representing for us? And it's therefore necessary that we kind of have this view of what is the whole book about. So I want to break it down just chapter by chapter of here's the sequence of events. And as we talk about this, kind of keep in mind, like, how could this relate to the greater Joshua's conquest? So it opens in chapter 1 where God encourages Joshua to lead them into the land. He's preparing the nation to cross the Jordan and enter the land. They send out the spies to Jericho. They find Rahab, who they're going to save, and they find out Jericho's afraid. Then they cross the Jordan with the Ark of the Covenant. They take 12 stones out of the Ark of the Jordan, and they set them up in this camp of Gilgal. That's where they came. Chapter 5, all the peoples of the lands fear because they hear that God has allowed you guys to cross the Jordan just like he crossed the Red Sea. Um, the manna also stops. They were given that in the wilderness, so no more manna. All those people who were born in the wilderness are now circumcised, so circumcision renewed. The reproach of Egypt is rolled off of them. They keep the Passover, and they also meet Michael the archangel, which we believe is Michael. Then they conquer Jericho. They save Rahab, but Achan sinned and he took stuff from Jericho when he shouldn't have. So they fail at trying to take Ai. But once they destroy Achan, they take Ai. Joshua builds an altar. Then 6 kings, seeing all this, they start to think, okay, well, we need to start preparing ourselves for they're coming against us soon. And this is when the Gibeonites, who knew they were going to be conquered, they disguised themselves and basically made a pact with Israel, and they became bondmen. In chapter 10, 5 kings gathered to smite Gibeon because they made this pact with Israel, basically. So Joshua and Israel defeat these 5 kings, and they acquire all their land. So their kingdom's expanding. This is God giving the land into their hands. Chapter 11, Jabin, he gathers a host of a bunch of different kings. They all come against Joshua, and Joshua defeats them, but the Lord's blessing and help. And it's as a result of that that the land rests from war, and it's inhabited, and it's distributed to all the different tribes. And then, really, the rest of the book is kind of just details. Like chapter 12, here's all the people they conquered. Chapter 13, Joshua, and we know this is a shadow, so no shadow is going to be perfect because that's what the figure is supposed to be. Um, only Christ is going to conquer all the land, so they couldn't do it at this point. But Joshua says, "Hey, here's the less stuff you got to conquer still." Chapters 14 through 19 are just nothing but these people got this, these people got that land. It's distribution to the tribes. Chapter 20, we've got cities of refuge designated. Chapter 21 is about the Levites and their portion that they're receiving. Chapter 22 is about the Reubenites, Gadites, Manasseh giving their stuff. So again, this is all just, hey, we've got it all. Here's your part. Here's your part. Chapter 23 starts. It says that a long time passes. Joshua exhorts the people before his death, and then the book closes with Joshua recounting everything that God had done for him. He renews the covenant with them, and then he dies in his own inheritance, and then the last verse, Eleazar the high priest dies. So that's the whole book, and the first 11 chapters are almost nothing but war and conquering. There's no pause or peace between the fighting. It's all just conquering. And then from 12 on, it's just about, hey, here's how it was possessed. Here's what they did with it. So now that we know that, let's establish some agreed upon facts of Christ's rule. You know, because we know Christ's rule can be divided into two general phases. We've got the Davidic and the Solomonic phase. Because David, he was a man after God's own heart. He was a man of war. He conquered the land. He's the one who established the borders. He also established peace, as you see from 2 Samuel 1, all these other verses. But to David, he was promised a seed that would sit on his throne. And we know that this seed is referring directly to Christ. Um, but David's son Solomon ruled in his stead, and Solomon also is a figure of Christ because of that. There were no wars at all in the days of Solomon. And, David was told in First Chronicles 22, I will give peace and quietness unto Israel in his days. And then we read in First Kings 4 about Solomon's rule. He had dominion over all the kings on this side of the river and had peace on all sides round about him. In Judah and Israel dwelt safely, every man under his vine and under his fig tree, from Dan even to Beersheba, all the days of Solomon. So these verses, what is this doing this? These verses show why David is referred to as David, my servant, in a lot of prophecies, like in Ezekiel 34 and 37. It's a title of Christ. And likewise, we see that Solomon is also a title of Christ. And when we look at these verses, we see how these relate to the phases of Christ's rule. We've got the Davidic phase where he's going to do what David did. He's going to conquer. He's a man of war. He's going to establish borders and peace. But once he's done that, just like David did, David exits the scene and Solomon inherits a throne with no war at all, and he has no war all of his life. So once Christ is Revelation 11:15 says, the kingdoms of this the earth are become the kingdoms of the Lord and of his Christ, of our Christ. So once that happens, the Davidic phase ends and the Solomonic phase begins. And as we know, at the end of the Solomonic phase, we have 1 Corinthians 15:24 to 28. Then cometh the end, when he shall have delivered up the kingdom to God, even the Father, when he shall have put down all rule and all authority and power. For he must reign till he hath put all enemies under his feet. And the last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. And when all things shall be subdued unto him, then shall the Son also himself be subject unto him, that put all things under him, that God may be all in all. So basically, once Christ defeats death itself, Christ is not in the throne anymore. He becomes part of the nation just like everybody else. I mean, he's still probably an elevated role. And then God comes down and sits in his throne. So um, that's what we know for certain. And basically, this just leaves a question of this loosing and destruction of Satan or the dragon. When does this take place? Is it the end of the Davidic phase? Is it the end of Solomonic phase? So, we don't have time to look at this like I like to, but Gilgal is very important in Joshua. Now we know Jerusalem is it's a land that they conquered here, but they didn't really have a capital in Jerusalem at this point. So I'm going to kind of hit this point quickly. That's where they came in. The arrow to the going to the left. That's where they came into the land, across the Jordan. But Gilgal is a basically it's a figure of Jerusalem under Christ's rule. Because when we look at what happened in Gilgal, we learn that I mean, it's all these things that point to Jerusalem and under the time of Christ. So in Joshua 4:19, this is where Israel entered the land and they camped. And again, if we look at maps, this is where Christ and the saints are going to enter. They took 12 stones from the Jordan and pitched them in Gilgal. Well, we think of 12 stones. The first thing I thought of was the 12 stones of New Jerusalem. It's the foundations of the New Jerusalem. And somebody also mentioned the 12 apostles going to be ruling. This is where the Israelites were circumcised. This is a cutting off of the flesh, indicating that all those people who have been wandering in the wilderness, the flesh is cut off. This is the immortalization of the saints. This is also where God said that Gilgal means rolling, and it's called rolling. They named it Gilgal because this is where God said, I'm going to roll off the reproach or the disgrace of Egypt off of you. So this is the rolling off of sin. So the flesh is cut off. We have no sin in our members anymore. This is immortalization. It's also where they kept the Passover with Joshua. This is where we're, Jerusalem. We hope to keep the Passover with the greater Joshua. This is also atonement, obviously. This is where the manna ceased, saying, your wanderings are over. So we're not wandering this wilderness of sin anymore. This is the time of us inheriting the promises. And then this is also, there's a bunch of places in this, but this is their base camp. They went out, they destroyed, then they came back to Gilgal. So Gilgal is a figure of Jerusalem during Christ's rule with his saints in the kingdom age. It's the only thing we can get out of this. Um, Now, I want to start with the end of Joshua 10. Now, Joshua 10, it ends with the defeat of the five kings, and they return to Gilgal. So they defeat the five kings, and they return to their camp in Gilgal. And again, at this point, the land's not all conquered yet. They've had no peace at all, and they've got more to conquer. And it's then, after they defeat the five kings, after they go to Gilgal, that Jabin in chapter 11 sends to gather this host against them. So, turn over to Joshua 10. I might skip through a couple verses in chapter 11 just to save us some time. But I guess also too, I know you guys are doing Revelation in your class. I don't want to rush through this, but I know we got Bible school season coming up, and I don't really want to make this a two-part where there's weeks separated between it. So if you'd like, if we need to, if we do this for class, we're gonna be doing stuff with this on class anyways. It's up to you guys. I'm happy to do it. But anyways, Joshua 10:43, and then we'll read most of chapter 11, probably all of it now that I think about it, because it's all relevant, and we're going to be looking at it pretty carefully here. If I can turn there. Okay. So, and Joshua returned and all Israel with him unto the camp to Gilgal. And it came to pass, when Jabin king of Hazor had heard those things, that he sent to Jobab king of Madon, to the king of Shimron, and the king of Exaph, and to the kings that were on the north of the mountains, and of the plains south of Kinneroth, and in the valley, and in the borders of Dor on the west, and to the Canaanite on the east and on the west, and to the Amorite and the Hittite and the Perizzite and the Jebusite, all these different people. And they went out, they and all their hosts with them, much people, even as the sand that is upon the seashore in multitude, with horses and chariots very many. And when all these kings were met together, they came and pitched together at the waters of Merom to fight against Israel. And the Lord said unto Joshua, be not afraid because of them, for tomorrow about this time I will deliver them up all slain before Israel. Thou shalt hew their horses and burn their chariots with fire. So Joshua came, and all the people of war with him, against them by the waters of Merom suddenly, and they fell upon them. And the Lord delivered them into the hand of Israel, who smote them and chased them unto great Zidon and unto Mizrephoth Maim, and unto the valley of Mizpah eastward, and they smote them until they left none remaining. And Joshua did unto them as the Lord bade him, and so on. Here's verse 10. And Joshua at that time turned back and took Hazor, smote the king thereof with the sword. For Hazor before times was the head of all those kingdoms. And they smote all the souls that were therein with the edge of the sword, utterly destroying them, and there was not left any to breathe. He burnt Hazor with fire, and all the cities of those kings, and all the kings of them, did Joshua take, and smote them with the edge of the sword, and he utterly destroyed them, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded. But as for the cities that stood still in their strength, Hazor burned none of them, or Israel burned none of them, save Hazor only. And the spoils of these cities and cattle they took, and so on. Um, Verse 15, and the Lord commanded, or as the Lord commanded Moses his servant, so did Moses command Joshua, and so did Joshua. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord commanded Moses. So Joshua took all that land and hills, and all the south country, and the land of Goshen, and everything he talks about. Um, verse 17 talks about him taking everything. Joshua 18, or verse 18, Joshua made war a long time with all those kings. There was not a city that made peace with the children of Israel, save the Hivites and the inhabitants of Gibeon. All other they took in battle. For it was of the Lord to harden their hearts, that they should come against Israel in battle, that he might destroy them utterly, and that they might have no favor, but that he might destroy them, as the Lord commanded Moses. And at that time came Joshua and cut off the Anakims from Hebron, and so on. There was none of the Anakims left in the land. Verse 23. So Joshua took the whole land, according to all that the Lord had said unto Moses, and Joshua gave it for an inheritance unto Israel, according to their divisions by their tribes, and the land rested from war. So there's a lot in there, but where am I at here? Oh. So there's a number of things in this. First thing I want to do, look at what period of Christ's reign is this referring to? Because we've got to establish that first. And it's pretty easy, actually. I mean, so first off, they're based in Gilgal, and they've got more land to conquer. There's no peace yet. Okay, well, this is obviously Christ and the saints in Jerusalem, still part of the Davidic phase because they're not done fighting yet. Solomon phase, there's no fighting. God hardens their hearts, so they come against Israel to battle. There's a bunch of prophecies that talk about this. I mean, Psalm 2, the nations align themselves so Christ can destroy them. Revelation 16 talks about nations being deceived, specifically to gather them together to the battle of Armageddon. So again, that's also beginning. Joshua took the whole land according to everything God promised. Again, that's towards the beginning of his reign. Not just the acquisition of the land, but the inheriting of the land. We know that's obviously going to take part at the beginning. Um, the distribution of the land, Ezekiel 47 to 48 talks about Israel gets this and that and this and that. So again, this is also the beginning of his reign. And again, this is the very first time in the whole book of Joshua that peace and war, they rest from war. It's the first time. Um, so this is the cessation of wars. In every single prophecy, every single one, we read about no more wars. It's always the beginning after Christ has finished conquering things. So very clearly, this can only refer to the uh, the beginning of Christ's reign. So now we see that. We look back at Joshua again. So we see the first 11 chapters are the Davidic phase. And then chapter 11 ends. Joshua took the whole land according to everything the Lord said to Moses. Joshua gave it for an inheritance unto Israel according to their divisions by their tribes. And the land rested from war. So at the end of chapter 11, we have the end of the Davidic phase. And then we have the start of the Solomonic phase. So this is how we can divide it up. There's no, other than the fleshly problems of, obviously Christ and the saints aren't going to have any problems like they had with AI just because, they're not sin and flesh, they're spirit. But anyways, so we have the end of the Davidic phase, beginning of the Solomonic phase. Interesting question is like, well, if we've got what happens at the end of David's sort of rule, is there anything at the end of this book that would seem to indicate the end of Christ's Solomonic phase, this 1 Corinthians 15 time period? And I really hope we have time to look at that today. We probably won't because it's really, really cool. But anyways, This is why I say that this is a scriptural conclusion that we're talking about, that this is something that happens at the beginning of Christ's reign, because Revelation 20 is based upon Joshua 11. And this chart, I mean, there's probably more I could add to this too, but everything in Revelation 20 about the dragon and being destroyed, it's taken from this account with Joshua 11. Jabin, his name means intelligent or wise. And in Revelation 20, we're talking about this old serpent, this sort of, and what do we know about the serpent? It's this subtle and this wise creature. We have this force that unifies all these different things. So it's a serpent unifier. Jabin's the one who's setting to gather all these people together. In Revelation 20, it's Satan that goes out to gather them together to battle. They come from all directions. As we read in Joshua 11, he sends people on north, south, east, and west. In Revelation 20, these are to the nations in the four quarters of the earth. The description of these number of people is the same. I mean, it's the sand of the seashore, and it says the sand of the sea. It's pretty similar to me. Um, Obviously, this is a confederacy. You know, they meet and they pitch together in Joshua 11, Revelation 20. They go up together to battle. They go up on the breadth of the earth together. It's the same sort of enemy, or not enemy, but the victim, I guess you can say. They're coming against Joshua and Israel. And we know in Revelation 20, at least that point, it's talking about Christ and the saints. This is cool. We read this in Joshua 10. Joshua returned and all with him to the camp to Gilgal. And in Revelation 20, it's called the camp of the saints. Like, why use the camp? It seems to be, hey, check that chapter out back there. It's the beloved city. This is also interesting too. It says that they in Joshua they came against the waters of Merom, and the word Merom means the height. And when we think of this beloved city, what do we know about Jerusalem in the kingdom age? Isaiah 2, all these others, it's going to be literally lifted up to an elevated city. So it seems like there's a connection there. Fire is the main means of destruction of both of these enemies. And the coolest part of this, one of the places they smite Jabin and his host at is called Mizraphoth Maim, which literally means burnings of water. And you think, why would you name a city Burnings of Water? That's just such a weird name. This is the lake of fire. The dragons cast in the lake of fire, and they're smitten at the burnings of water. And who achieves this victory? You know, God tells Joshua, I will deliver them into their hand, and Joshua executes this. I think we can see the same thing in Revelation 20. This is God through Christ. And this is why I say that this is a scriptural conclusion, because if Joshua 11 represents the last conflict of the Davidic phase and the beginning of the Solomonic phase, and Revelation 27 through 10 is based on Joshua 11, then we have to conclude that Revelation 27 through 10 represents this last conflict beginning the peaceful part of Christ's reign. So the dragon is cast into the lake of fire toward the beginning of his reign. It's not the first thing he does, but it's the last thing is his conquering phase of his rule. This is what results in the peace. Now, some may say, well, how do we know that Joshua 11 refers to the Davidic phase? How do we know that's not the end of the Solomonic phase? Tons of problems with that. I've got some slides after this. I know we won't cover it today, but on the PDF, you can look at it. One of the big problems with that is, well, it's only after Jabin's defeat that Israel inherits the land. So if we're thinking typically here, we're saying that nobody's going to inherit the land until after Christ's 1,000-year reign. Like, well, then Israel's not subject. There's so many problems with that. But also, there's no period of rest in Joshua up to Joshua 11 that allows for the peaceful reign of Christ. So if we look at Joshua's rule, kind of like Christ, we've got the Davidic phase. He enters, he conquers. They defeat Jabin here in chapter 11. But so it just doesn't make sense that this can refer to the last part of Christ's rule. But there is a place that it would make perfect sense to record this attack, if this is supposed to teach us of a rebellion at the end of Christ's rule. If it's teaching us of a rebellion at the end of Christ's rule, it should be over here. If we look at Joshua 23, verse 1, this one states, and it came to pass a long time after that the Lord had given rest unto Israel from all their enemies round about, that Jabin came against them? No, that's not what we see. This is Joshua waxed old and stricken in age and all this. So we're told they've had rest and peace for a long time. And what we're told is after this, Joshua waxes old and he gives them all this exhortation. But we would expect that this to read like this, that, after they've given rest, that Jabin sent and all these different things, this would be the perfect place to indicate when the dragon's defeated. But it's not what we see. And what our role is really just figure out why is the scripture the way it is and learn from that. That being said, this is not the only place we see this pattern. There's two other passages I want to refer to that show when the dragon is defeated. And one, it's in Isaiah 27:1. And it says, "In that day the Lord with his sore and great and strong sword shall punish Leviathan, the piercing serpent, even Leviathan, that crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea." Now, if we look into these terms, we can see very easily they relate to this dragon in Revelation 20. I mean, we got the serpent and the dragon. Leviathan means it's a wreathed animal, especially a serpent or a crocodile or some other monster. Brother Thomas talks about it like as a coiled serpent. So this is a serpent-like creature, and this says the dragon is slain in the sea. Well, what is the sea? What are seas symbolic of in prophecy? It's nations. So the dragon is destroyed in the nations. But the big part of this is chapter 27 says, "In that day the Lord's going to do this." Like, well, what day is that? Well, this is one of the places I think chapter divisions don't really help us because God didn't put these chapter divisions in here, or at least directly, the translators did that. What day is this? Well, if we look back, if you can open your Bibles, it's good to see this, but um, Isaiah 26, the end of 26 as it goes into 27 says, "Thy dead men shall live, together with my dead body shall they arise. Awake and sing, ye that dwell in the dust, for thy dew is as the dew of herbs, and the earth shall cast out her dead." It sounds like the resurrection to me. "Come, my people, enter thou into thy chambers, and shut thy doors about thee. Hide thyself, as it were, for a little moment, until the indignation be overpast. For behold, the Lord cometh out of his place to punish the inhabitants of the earth for their iniquity. The earth also shall disclose her blood, and shall no more cover her slain. In that day the Lord with a sore and great strong," so and so on. That's how it reads if you just read through these. So when is this going to happen? This is a resurrection and the iniquity of the earth being punished. It's the beginning of Christ's reign. The other place is Psalm 74. And verses 13 and 14 say, "Thou didst divide the sea by thy strength. Thou breakest the heads of the dragons in the waters. Thou breakest the heads of Leviathan in pieces, and give him to be meat to the people, inhabiting the wilderness." So between these two verses, we have this dragon entity component with the serpent and the dragon. Interestingly, this says the heads. It's not singular, it's plural. And in Revelation 12, where we first see the dragon, it's got multiple heads. So this is in both places, the heads are being wounded. And what's interesting is John Thomas in Eureka, he interprets this as this. So he says the heads of Leviathan are those apocalyptically exhibited. So basically, this is talking about the dragon of Revelation. The people in the wilderness are the saints in Israel after the flesh, made willingly subject to him. So he's saying that verse 14 is referring to the destruction of the dragon and the saints, or Israel, natural Israel, being subject to the saints. Well, that's got to be the beginning of Christ's reign because Israel is going to be the subjects in the kingdom. And after Christ's rule, everybody's immortal anyways. Again, this is the dragon defeated at the beginning of Christ's reign. Now, I will say, transparency's sake, John Thomas believed that the rebellion would be after Christ or towards the end of Christ's reign. And he makes this argument. It doesn't make sense at all. He says, well, verse 13 is talking about the destruction of the dragon. Verse 14 is talking about the binding. But it doesn't make sense in that it's the heads that are wounded in both cases. A temporary bruising is a bruising of the heel. We know that from Genesis. A bruise of the head's fatal. So in both verses, this is only about the complete destruction of the dragon. So, anyways, there's other things we could talk about, but this is a very consistent theme we see. So looking back to Joshua as a whole, actually we're doing pretty good. I want to look at this little green section down here, direct our attention to is there anything in Joshua 24, the last chapter of the book, that would sort of symbolize this period of Christ is not ruling anymore. sin is gone and all that. Now, before we do that, it's very important when we're looking at shadows and how the Old Testament talks about it that we look at this example. We know Melchizedek. It's amazing. We don't really have much about him in the Old Testament, but there's tons written about him in the New Testament. In the Old Testament, we're not told, we have no record of him being born. We're not told that he has parents. His death is not recorded. And yet, when we read of him in Hebrews 7, Paul says Melchizedek is a figure of Christ. Melchizedek without father, without mother, without descent, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like unto the Son of God, abideth a priest continually. So the question is, did Melchizedek really not have any parents? Did he not die? No, he's a person. He has to die. But what we see is he had parents. He had all these things, but these details were intentionally omitted by the Spirit to allow Melchizedek to give this impression of, the lasting nature of Christ's rule. Because if we knew when Melchizedek was born and died, it would kind of he would not serve to show the lasting nature of Christ's rule. So those were intentionally omitted, and what we learn is sometimes what we're told is in the shadow is important, but what we're not told can be just as important. And we're thinking just for the shadow purpose, like what is this teaching us? And we see that in Joshua 24. So, very quickly, if you can read it on your own, the biggest chunk of Joshua 24 is him reminding them, hey, the Lord brought you out of Egypt and all these different things. But to summarize, in Joshua 21 and 24, it's emphasized that Joshua and the elders ruled over Israel the rest of their lives. There was no war at all, and Israel served all the days of their lives. So, answers really well to the Solomonic phase. And then this would relate to, again, Christ's reign where there's no war. We have a final covenant made with Israel. He says, "Hey, you're a rebellious people," but they said, "We will serve," and they renew the covenant with Israel in verses 24 to 28. Well, we think of the end of the kingdom age when mortals are turned immortal because they're faithful. I think that's what this is kind of a figure of. We've got this covenant being made and ratified at the end of Christ's rule. I mean, since everybody else a covenant's only really good for people that are from people that are immortal to mortals. So I think this is indicating the judgment and immortalization of the saints as other things will show. It's really cool, and I'm curious on your thoughts on this. Joshua sets up a single great stone as a witness. And when they crossed the Jordan in Gilgal, he set up 12 stones as a witness. Now it's just one big one. To me, that's indicating that at this period, you don't have all these different tribes anymore because there's no mortals. This is all one united spiritual family. Like in Ephesians 1:10 talks about this, but Daniel 2, there's one stone that strikes the earth and it grows to become one great mountain. This is the united, immortalized family of God. This is super cool. Joshua dies at 110 years old. The only other person we know who died at that age that I can recall was Joseph, the other super great figure of Christ. And what we kind of get this idea of is like, why 110? Well, his role was complete. We read that he did everything that Moses and God had commanded him. So his role is complete. And if we look at Psalm 110, I think there's no other book that has 110 chapters. This is the whole chapter here. And it specifically sums up Christ's role, both the kingly and the priestly role. So, a Psalm of David, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make thine enemies thy footstool. Think of this in the sense of what Joshua was completing all this in a shadow form. The Lord shall send the rod of thy strength out of Zion. Rule thou in the midst of thine enemies. Thy people shall be willing in the day of thy power, and the beauties of holiness from the womb of the morning. Thou hast the dew of thy youth. The Lord hath sworn and will not repent. Thou art a priest forever at the order of Melchizedek. The Lord at thy right hand shall strike through kings in the day of his wrath. He shall judge among the heathen, fill the places with dead bodies, and wound the heads over many countries. There's that wounding of the head again. I didn't realize that till just now. He shall drink of the brook in the way, therefore shall he lift up his head. So that's Christ's role, and Joshua dying at that age of 110 indicates it's done. He did it. But it's not all. So I think that is showing Christ, he's fulfilled his role. Christ's mission is complete. All enemies are put down. And Joshua was buried in his own portion at Timnath Serah in Mount Ephraim. Timnath Serah literally means portion of the sun. And what do we know of, Malachi 4:2, Christ is called the Son, the S-U-N, of righteousness. And Ephraim means double portion. It's kind of like a firstborn sort of inheritance. So Joshua being buried, he's not ruling anymore, and he inherits the portion of the son. He stays there forever, as we know, and his double portion. This is Jesus. He's not ruling anymore because Joshua's dead. Um, so Joshua's death would be like a figure of Christ stepping down from his throne. He inherits his portion along with the rest of Israel. So he's not ruling, and he's in his inheritance. And one of the most interesting things, like, why would you end a book like Joshua talking about the death, the high priest dies? And it's very important. If you look at Numbers 20:28, most passages, and this is why we talked about Melchizedek, they say, so and so died, and so reigned in their stead. Let's read that real quick, just to drive it home. The very last verse in the whole book of Joshua, just so you can see how this is. It's such a sort of a cliffhanger. And Eleazar, the son of Aaron, died, and they buried him in a hill that pertained to Phinehas his son, which was given him in Mount Ephraim. Doesn't say. Now we know his son ruled after him, but it doesn't say that he did. So we get this impression that there's no more ruler, and there's also no more high priest. So the only reason we have, I think this is typing the time of the cessation of the priesthood. You don't need a priest if you don't have mortals. So this is showing, and that the fact that this is the last verse of the whole book is there's no more mortals anymore. This is typing the time when of 1 Corinthians 15 and Revelation 21 when God himself comes down. So Joshua closes with this final covenant, dedication to God, no more leader, no more high priest, and those are things that we see. Not that there's no leader, but God himself comes down. I don't know how you could really type God himself coming down, because nobody could really represent God like that. But anyways, it's amazing. Look, you gotta look into these things more for yourself. But there's a lot of things, obviously, we could talk about, a lot of questions of, well, what was a 1,000 year period? Why are there two separate 1,000 year periods? When was Satan loosed? What is the dragon? Why is this recorded where it is in Revelation? There's a lot of other things we could talk about later, but this is the consistent thing we see in Scripture. And especially it makes sense if we line up Christ's rule with what we know about Joshua's. If he's typing him, it makes sense that all things line up. So, I know there's a lot of things, probably a lot of questions about this, but this is the picture we get and how beautiful it really is. It just shows how much God has actually revealed to us and how much He's planned from the beginning. I mean, um, this is in Joshua 11. We're reading about Revelation 20, and all we got to do is really just look for it. And what a thought it is, kind of as we start to close and think of memorials, to read through Joshua with that in the back of our mind of that this is what we, under the greater Joshua, are going to be doing. What a blessing it would be to be one of his soldiers and to go through an experience and do all those things with him conquering the land. That's what we'll be doing. And, as we think of, we hope to enter into that antitypical Gilgal with him where the reproach of sin is rolled off of us. The reproach of Egypt's no more. That this flesh, we have the final circumcision where there's no more sin in our members. Um, our wanderings have ceased because we certainly wander in this wilderness now. And then we enjoy that Passover with the greater Joshua in our own midst. Yeah, so the question for us then is, as we wander through this wilderness, will we enter the land with him or will we perish in the wilderness before getting to enter? And that's a question that we answer now, is it not?